Hello and welcome to today's lesson on Standards 2.6b and c in Algebra 2, and also the Study Island lesson, Polynomial Graphs. And so if you're working in either of those two places, this is where you want to be to get a little review and maybe learn a little something more. Remember, as we're going through, please be taking notes, and if I go too fast, just pause or rewind, and then as always, you can pause at the beginning of the question, work it out, and then check yourself by watching the video, and that way you can get a good gauge of how well you're doing and what you still need to learn. And today we're just going to be looking at polynomial graphs, so their x and y intercepts, how you can tell if they're increasing or decreasing at the beginning and end, and different attributes like that you want to make sure you get down in your notes. So I'm so glad that you're here, and let's go ahead and look at some questions.
We're going to be looking at signs of polynomials. So these could be x cubes, x to the fourth, x to the fifth, and so to help us out, we're going to look at what the end behaviors and how many mins and max or turning points they could have. So to do this, you're going to look at the sign of the leading coefficient, and if it's positive and it's an odd degree, so x cubed, x to the fifth, x to the seventh, you are going to be increasing with some sort of turns in the middle here. But if it's negative, you're going to be decreasing with some sort of terms in the middle. And then if it's an even degree, so x squared, x to the fourth, x to the sixth, so on, and that leading coefficient in front of that variable is positive, then both ends are going to be going up. But if it's negative, both ends are going to be going down. And the number of turning points, or a min or max, local min or max, is going to be at most that coefficient minus 1. So if I have an x cubed, it's going to be at most, I'm going to have 2. And so just remember, an x cubed looks like a snake. X to the fourth, that's going to look like a W, but it might have less turns. It might not have all of these min and max, which is fine. Those are just your basic graphs. And the other thing you need to know is how to find a Y-intercept. If you're finding a Y-intercept, you're going to set x equal to 0 and solve for y. And if you're finding an X-intercept, it's going to be the opposite. You're going to set y equal to 0 and solve for x. And those are the key features that you need to know to solve the following problems. So here they want to know what are the y values of the relative min and max on this graph. So relative min and max is just a place where you have at the top of a hill or a bottom of a valley. So I have 3 here that I showed you with my black dots. And I'm just going to look at my y value. So my y value here is 1. My y value here is negative 3. And then my y value for the last one is 5. And so my answer is going to be negative 3, 1, 5, which is choice B. This graph here, it wants to know what are the x and y intercepts of the function above. So my x intercepts are going to be this negative 2, 0, and 2. And so those numbers, remember when you have a point, it's always x and then y. So I need to have negative 2, 0, and 2 as my x numbers, and then the 0 is going to be for the y number, my y coordinate. And then my y-intercept is right here. It's also at the origin, so it is at 0, and then my all y-intercepts have an x number of 0. So those are going to be my x and y-intercepts, which makes numbers 2 answer letter A. Here it wants to know what are the x values of the x-intercepts. So my x-intercepts are where it crosses the x-axis. in the blue dots here. And so I'm just going to look at what my x values are there. So I have a -2, 0, 1, and 3. And so that's going to be my answer, which is choice B. So here it gives me the point 0, -1. And it wants to know what are the properties here. So it's basically asking, is that a min or a max? And is it an x or y axis? Well, it's a low point, so it's going to be a minimum. And then it crosses the y-axis, so it's going to be a y-intercept, so that makes my answer A. Here it gives me another point. It gives me 2, 0, which is right here, and it asks me what are the properties of that. So it's basically asking if it's a min or a max. So here it's a low point, so it's going to be a minimum. But now it touches the x-axis, so it's going to be an x-intercept, so that makes my answer C. Here it wants to know what is the group of factors that you can get from this graph. So I know that my answers here are x equals -2, x equals +1, and x equals +2. So if I set those work backwards to get the factors, I'm going to have to set these equal to 2, so that means, or equal to 0, so that means x equals +2 equals 0. Subtract 1 from both sides here, so x minus 1 equals 0. And then subtract 2 from both sides, so that means x equals -2 equals 0. And those give me my 3 factors. So that gives me my answer of letter C. And so basically what it's doing is when you're finding the factors, this is a -2, so the factor has a +2. This is a +1, so the factor has a -1. This is a +2, so the factor has a -2. So the factors is where you get the opposite symbol. So this problem's going to be similar. It crosses at -1, so that means my factor is going to be x plus 1. It's the opposite sign. It bounces, so it means it comes down and touches but doesn't actually go through at x equals +1. So that means I'm going to have a factor of x -1 or x minus 1. And since it bounces there, that's a sign that I'm going to have it twice. Because this is definitely a snake. So that means I'm going to have an x cubed, which means I need to have 3 factors. So if I only have 2, that would make it an x squared, which is a U shape, which this problem definitely is. So that's another reminder that I'm going to need to have 3. And so I look for that third one at the bounce. So I can write this as x minus 1, that quantity squared. So that's going to make my answer A. Here it wants to know if I give you this equation, then which of these graphs does it match? Well, I look and my leading coefficient is the -1, the coefficient in front of the largest exponent. So since it's negative, that means that it's going to be decreasing in general. So it's an odd, the 3 is odd, so that means my ends are going to do different directions, just like we looked at in the notes. And since it's negative, they do the decreasing. So the only one here that has the right end behavior is graph X. So that makes my final answer C. Here I have a U-shaped, and if I look at my answers, my equations that I'm trying to match to it, they're all x squareds. So when your end behavior is pointing both in the same direction, that's a sign that it's going to be even. So I know right away that they're all even. And since they're both pointing down, that means my lead coefficient has to be negative. So right away, I can cross out B and C because they have positive lead coefficients. So now I just have to figure out which one of these is going to be the right answer. So I'm just going to go in and solve letter A. I'm going to factor it to see which my x-intercepts are going to be. So when I factor this, my negative 2x breaks into negative 2x and positive x, and then my positive 6 breaks into positive 3 and positive 2. And if you were to FOIL that back out, all the signs would match and it would work out. And so I'm going to set each of these equal to 0 and see if they give me the appropriate x-intercepts, the appropriate solutions. So I have negative 2x equals negative 3 here. So x equals 3 halves, which is the same as x equals positive 1 half. So I do have an x-intercept at positive 1 half, so that one works out so far. And then here, x equals negative 2. My other x-intercept is at x equals negative 2, so that means my answer here is going to be A because it has the appropriate x-intercepts when I solve. My last graph here that I'm matching to an equation, I have an even power, so that means that my end behavior is either going to be both up or both down, and it's a positive lead coefficient there, so that means they're both going to be up. My only graph here that the end behavior are both increasing is graph X, so that means my final answer here is going to be B. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope you learned something new.